Everyone, and welcome to my channel where I talk about movies. The movie I want to talk about today comes from 1932, and this is Vampyr, directed by Carl Theodor Dreyer. Vampyr is in the Criterion Collection, and it is also streaming on the Criterion channel with all the extras, and there's some really good extras that go along with this Criterion release. And as the title indicates, it's a story about a vampire, but it's a very unusual one. And Dreyer made unusual films, and I was looking for films that are sort of adjacent to Louis Buñuel as far as surrealism goes. I had never seen Vampyr before, but I know that visually it does stray into the surreal, and watching the film, it indeed does. And it is a story of a young man who seems to be on a fishing trip, but we learn that he has a very avid interest in vampires. He checks in an inn. He hears all kinds of strange noises, howling dogs, birds, and he looks out in the corridor, and this very hideous-looking man sticks his head out and looks down at him. And he soon learns that he has indeed entered a town that has been and is being infected by a vampire. An elderly man comes into his room, puts a package down and says, "If I die, open this package, because my daughter must live." And eventually our hero gets to go to the chateau where this elderly man lives, and his oldest daughter is indeed been infected by a vampire, and she's trying to recover from her wounds. She seems to be almost deathly ill. There's a doctor attending her. He too is hideous. So we get many of the trappings of a more or less traditional vampire movie, which this is not. And then when the father is indeed killed, our hero opens the book and he learns about vampires. He learns about vampires in this particular area and how you fight their manifestation. Along the way, he sees all kinds of creepy elements, but most particularly shadows. There's shadows on the wall, people dancing. There's nobody dancing, it's just shadows, and he walks around the corner and there's a small band playing. And eventually we do encounter the actual vampire. This is not the vampire Dracula or Nosferatu, especially, and more towards Dracula. It's an old woman. She has a very stern looking face, but she has sort of got her minions, and the doctor is one of her minions, and there's a few others as well, who she is infected and is now using to gather more victims, including the oldest daughter of this man who has now been killed. Now, all of this, despite the fact that this is traditional kind of what we'd expect from a vampire movie, we get very disoriented here. Dreyer was could be seen as, and especially here, as an experimental filmmaker as far as narrative technique and his whole aesthetic. So we kind of lose our bearings a bit, maybe even more than a bit for mass audience, because this was a big failure commercially. But we do eventually, we are able to identify who the bad guys are and what the whole thrust of the narrative becomes. I've described some of the visual quality of the film, but there's one sequence here that is truly extraordinary. When our hero, who has had to give blood to this victim, and he's very weak, and he's trying to find the younger sister who has run off, and he is weak, and he's in the field, sits on a bench, and all of a sudden, in a double negative, he rises out of his body, and he goes into this local mill, and there's a casket there. And when he looks inside the casket, it is him. So our hero has now been divided into three different people, and he is in the casket. And this is an extraordinary scene because we get Dreyer puts a window in here so we can look down in the casket and see our hero dead. But also he puts the camera inside the window so we can see what it's like to be laying in a casket. He eventually does recover. He becomes the three people now become one. And this actor is played by the man who financed the movie. Dreyer had the Trial of Joan of Arc may be considered today classic, one of the great films of all time, certainly one of the great silent films of all time. But it was a failure in its own time, and he had the people who financed that. He had a contract with that production company, but when the failure of Joan of Arc, he had a 2-picture deal, and they reneged on the contract, and so he was in litigation for quite a few years. So I think it's like 5 years before we get to Vampyr, 4 or 5 years. So he hooks up with this sort of minor aristocrat, a baron, who has some money, and he's willing to finance Dreyer's film. And Dreyer was thinking that he has to have some sort of commercial success in vampire movies. There'd already been quite a few. Nosferatu by Murnau. I don't know if you ever saw Todd Browning's Dracula. I think it was around the same time. But I think in one of the supplements, there was like at least 20 movies in the 1920 silent era that concerned vampires. So he thought, well, that's a genre I can work in and hopefully have a commercial success. But he clearly is making an experimental avant-garde movie here. I don't know how his eye on the commercial success of the movie certainly strayed away. So the financier, he goes by the name of Julian West, it's a nom de plume, and he's going to finance the movie, but in order to finance it, he wants to play the lead role. And Dreyer, I don't know if he was forced to do it, but he did do it. And the actor, although he's not terrible, he has these big eyes that they alternate between puzzlement, horror. You really don't know what he's thinking most of the time. And then most of the other actors too weren't professional actors, but he had to have the oldest daughter who has been infected. He had to have a good actor here because that's a difficult part, and it's played by an actress named Sybil Schmitz, and she really is good, and facially she really delivers the goods, and she was somewhat has some notoriety going forward. She continued to have a movie career all through. She stayed in Germany through World War II, and but then she had health problems and perhaps drug addiction, and died in the early 1950s. Now she was the model that Fassbinder used in his movie Veronica Voss, if you've ever seen a very powerful movie. And the cinematographer here is Rudolf Mate, and he would go on to photograph many films and went to Hollywood. I think he did Hitchcock's Lifeboat. He directed. He also went into directing, and he is the director of the original DOA with him and O'Brien. So the two of them, this was a movie that was sort of shot on the fly. They would, for instance, the doctor's death was as originally written was who has been as part of the vampire's minions. He had a death where he was supposed to die in the quicksand. But then they found this old mill in and Dreyer and Mattei were both taken with this, and they provided really a really powerful ending for this doctor at this mill. It was an old flour mill. But as I say, and it was filmed in three different versions. There was English, French, and German version. The one that's survived is the German version. But there's very little dialogue in this movie. This looks like a silent film. I mean, there's so little dialogue, and of course the actors weren't professional. Outside of a couple, they weren't professional. So I guess there was a need to diminish the amount of dialogue that these non-professional actors would have to do, and as compensation, we get a very creative, very memorable visual design. It's a movie that you might think, it's so unusual, especially as it pertains to being a vampire movie. Now, on the supplements are terrific. Tony Raines does a commentary, which is very good. David Bordwell does a short, sort of like an introduction, explanation, very interesting and understandable. Bordwell did write a book on the films of Carl Theodor Dreyer. I was looking for a full-length biography of Dreyer. I've not seen one. And Guillermo del Toro also stops by for a couple minutes, describing the effect that Vampyr had on him and the influence on some of his own visual designs in his films. And we have two really good, there's a visual essay that sort of shows Dreyer filming Vampyr, and then there's another one where we see Dreyer describes all of his films one by one. And it's very short, but it's very interesting. And of course, one of the mysteries of Dreyer's career is he made hardly any films. I think he made like 8 or 9 silent films culminating in Joan of Arc, then 4 years to Vampyr, and then I think a dozen years to Day of Wrath, and then 14 years more to Ordette, and then his final film Gertrude was in 1964. And we see the Paris premiere. We don't see the effect of the Paris premiere of Gertrude, his last film, which was a disaster, got a disastrous reaction. And it's a very challenging, difficult film. I finally conquered it maybe about a year ago, and I've watched it twice since, and I've grown to like it. But in this documentary, we see Dreyer in Paris, and he's being greeted by some French directors. Henri-Georges Clouzot comes, and Dreyer says, yes, I know your film, when Clouzot introduces himself. Who else was there? I think Francois Truffaut. Godard comes with Anna Karenina. This is, early 1960s. And he introduces himself. I don't know that Dreyer knew Godard's films, but in one of his Anna Karenina films, I think it's My Life to Live, Anna Karenina goes to see The Passion of Joan of Arc, and in a memorable sequence, we see her sort of superimposed on Falconetti, who was playing Joan of Arc, with tears streaming down, Anna Karenina's tears streaming down her face as she's watching it. So all in all, this is kind of challenging. At first sight, you might think it doesn't make much sense, but even if it doesn't make much sense, it's still just it's just a fascinating visual design that Dreyer, in his conception of what a vampire movie would be. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who listened. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.